Hello, grade 12s. Welcome to today's lesson. It's Economics with Ms. Piwe. In this lesson, we will be focusing on government intervention. Remember, we are still busy looking at market failures. So what are the reasons? So in the previous lesson, we've looked at the reasons and some of the consequences of market failures. But what can the government do? So we'll be looking at some of the government interventions that have been put into place in order to address the whole issue of market failures. So let's get started. So we're looking at government intervention, like I've just said. So what are the rules and regulations? Because we know that when government comes in, if they want to have corrective measures to particular, or to put corrective measures to particular situations, then they will have to use rules and regulations in order to do that. They need a framework that they can follow in order to ensure that firms and businesses have a guideline that they need to follow in order to achieve the objectives. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the concept of direct controls. So the government can pass laws or use existing legislative framework. So here's legislation coming in to control businesses that generate negative externalities. Okay, so we said that, you know, government has programs in place. They use advertising to try and inform and educate people about the negative externalities that are found in the markets. But if they want to have strict control over these issues, then they will have to consider implementing legislation around these issues and also passing laws based on these issues. Like we said on our previous lesson, when the law was passed on the advertising of cigarettes on TV, because that was put on stop, and now cigarette companies are not allowed to advertise on TV because now there is a law that actually states that they are not allowed to do so. So that will be part of direct control, where legislation is used, a framework is designed, and laws are enforced in order to control businesses that generate the negative externalities. Okay, so moving into the imperfect markets. So we know that firms in an imperfect market supply a limited quantity of goods and services for a very high price. Okay, so they make sure that they limit their quantity and also they hike up the price in order to maximize the profits. So how does government then control this? Because it is a market that is not based on fairness, because information is not complete. For example, there are barriers in terms of entry based on capital and so on. In other sectors, there are huge amounts of capital output that are required in order to enter that market space. So that on its own then serves as a barrier to the market. So the government uses its laws on competition. Remember, we spent a bit of time in our previous lesson looking at the competition policy and also the structures or the organizations that one can approach if they have any issues regarding competition. So government can use its laws on competition to prevent exorbitant prices charged by firms, to ensure entry to the market is free, prevent harmful collusion. So we also looked at collusion in our previous lesson, companies coming together, you know, a few companies in that sector, and they happen to be large companies, come together and they form agreements in order to dominate the market space. In so doing, they create a barrier because they push out other businesses or firms that are wanting to enter into that market space. So collusion is also another issue that government has to manage quite carefully. Okay, so let's continue. And encourage foreign competition, which helps to keep prices of goods low. Okay, so it's good to have the foreign market come into our secular flow because it all starts there. Having that injection coming from the foreign market because they also help in controlling the competition, because also they put the local suppliers, or they keep them on their toes, because they can't relax, because these guys are coming in and they want a piece of this pie. So they have to do all that they can to protect the piece of the pie and to maintain what they have, because if they don't do that, then the foreign market or competition or companies will come in, and they would help to lower the prices on goods. So competition, like we said earlier on, is a healthy aspect of an economy. It is encouraged, because if there is competition, it means that we have options. So we are not just limited to one supplier, but we can explore other options that are available to us. Now, the second point that we're going to look at is the establishment or establishing minimum wages. So when the government enforces a minimum wage, it means workers have to be paid a certain wage amount and not anything less than this. Okay, so there has been talk around this, the minimum wage, that there's a stipulated minimum wage that the workers have to be paid, and they can't be paid anything less than this amount that is stipulated by government. So it's important, because it ensures that people are not being exploited in terms of their labor, that they're actually rewarded or remunerated accordingly based on the skills and the hours that they put into the work that they do. So I fully support, the issue of a minimum wage, because also it's good for economic activity, because if people have more money or more disposable income, they can actually engage in economic activity. They can purchase their consumer goods and wants, and they can be active in economic participation. So it's important that we support government on this initiative of enforcing a minimum wage for South African workers. So the figure shows that if the wage rate is set at W, the corresponding demand and supply of labor will be Q. So we're going to look at a graph that would illustrate all these points that we are going through. So we know that at W, that's the point where the rate will be set, and also then the demand and the supply for labor will be at Q. Okay, so maybe let's go then now and see where this information is. So we have our graph over here. All right, so we've got our wage rate on this side, and then we've got quantity this side. Okay, so here's W. So our wage rate will be set there, and then the quantity supplied and demand will be at Q. So that's the first bit of information that we need to establish. So I'm just going to get a different color so that we can indicate this initial process of where the original rate is, and also the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded. There we are. I want us to be back on this page. Okay, I'm going to pull my screen up so that we can see the information. Great. So if a minimum wage of W1, okay, so we've established the original minimum wage rate. So now we are looking at W1 is set. So the demand for labor will decrease from Q to Q1. Okay, some people may become unemployed due to the introduction of minimum wage. Okay, so there could be companies that say, hang on, we are not in a financial position to actually pay this minimum wage, so we have to let go of our workers because we can't pay them the wage that is enforced by government, and then that would result in those people losing their jobs. Okay, so now at W1, the fact that now the minimum wage is now initiated, the labor will decrease from Q to Q1 to show that there has been a decrease in the labor force because of the minimum wage policy that has been initiated. So here's our new point. the point of minimum wage, as you can see over here, it's stated. So at this point, minimum wage is introduced into the market and it will be enforced by the government. So there'll be certain firms and businesses that feel that we are not in a position to provide or to pay this minimum wage, and therefore we have to retrench our employees. In that instance, then there's going to be a decrease in the labor force, and hence we're going to have this shift from Q to Q1, which indicates that there has been a decrease or a decline in the labor force based on the introduction of a minimum wage. So just know that when this happens, when it is set, initially we're going to have a decrease in the labor force, because firms may say that we are not in a financial position to actually pay our workers the minimum wage that is required. However, the quantity of labor supplied will increase from Q to Q2. Okay, so now this is the labor that's supplied. It will increase from Q to Q2. More people will offer their labor because of the higher wages. Okay, so more people will be willing to work. So whereas previously people will not be keen to work because of the wage, because the wage was so poor that they felt there was no point in actually entering the labor market. But now, since there's been a hike in the wage, there could be more people who are attracted to the offer that's been made, and they now find the labor market more appealing than it was previously. Okay, so let's have a look at this information. So we know that at W1, we're going to have a decrease in the labor force because of the introduction of minimum wage. But now, with Q2 happening, so we said at Q1 will indicate that there has been a decrease in the labor force. But now, at Q2, now you're going to have an increase in people who are interested in entering the labor market because of the minimum wage that has been offered. So they feel it is worth exchanging their factors of production so that they can generate a remuneration or an income. So this will then hype up the need or the interest from the labor force to enter the labor market. So just be aware of that point. Okay, so let's continue just going over our information this side. So we're saying, we conclude by saying that more people will offer their labor because of the higher wage that has been initiated by government, by the fact that they've now introduced a new policy, which is the minimum wage policy. So it's all summed up in this beautiful graph. So the setting of maximum prices or price ceilings also is another factor that we need to consider. So let's see how government could use this as an intervention. So the government sets a maximum price ceiling. Okay, so when you build a house, you have a ceiling, and then you can't go at any point above that. So that limits you in a way. So you can't sell above that maximum price. When they say you've reached your ceiling, it means that you've maxed your price, and you can't sell at a higher price than the one that is considered to be the maximum price. So the government sets a maximum price ceiling below the market price to make goods more affordable, okay? Because government does want consumers to be able to access these goods, and they shouldn't become too exclusive that a smaller or a minority group has the financial resources to purchase those goods, but they should be made available to the wider public or society, and hence the government will then intervene and set up a price ceiling saying that you can't sell above this particular product. And we know that the maximum price ceiling is below the market price to make the goods more affordable to consumers. And then at market price, that's where you actually maximize your profits. So just before you get to the market price, you reach a ceiling, a maximum price ceiling, which is set by government in order to encourage the consumers to purchase more of those products, but just to make them more affordable to ordinary citizens. Maximum prices allow for poor greater access to certain goods and services. So I've just mentioned this point, that it ensures that products do not become too exclusive to one market, but a wider range, or the wider society has the opportunity, in other words, to access that market. So it's important that government intervenes so that the market space does not become too exclusive, but also it creates a platform for those that are less fortunate to be able to purchase goods and services. A maximum price is set on goods such as basic foods, housing, and transport as well, because we know that these are used by almost all the citizens on a daily basis. The workforce will have to take transport to go to work. You need shelter because that's part of the hierarchy of needs. You need the basic foods, your bread, your milk. So government will put a price ceiling on those products in order to ensure that they do become available to the public, but most importantly, that they are affordable and they are not overpriced. So they do have laws and regulations in regards to those products so that they continue to be available to the ordinary citizens, because they are considered to be basic goods that we need in order to survive. So before we continue with the lesson, let's take a short break, and I will see you right after this.